They shoved her face first into the dirt and burst out laughing as she hit the ground. Grit clung to her cheek. Mud streaked her sleeve. No rank stitched to her uniform to shield her. No allies around to intervene. Just 4 cadets looming over a woman they thought didn't belong. But what they didn't realize was that Navy SEALs don't need insignias to command respect, and she hadn't come here looking to prove herself. She was there to observe, until they gave her no choice but to act. And when she rose again, she gave them a lesson they'd carry for the rest of their careers about what real combat looks like when you push someone who's endured far worse. Before we show you how Lieutenant Commander Avery Rogers turned that training yard into a masterclass in discipline, make sure you're subscribed to Old Bill's Tales with the bell icon on, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Because this story isn't about getting knocked down, it's about what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. The rain had stopped an hour earlier, yet puddles still clung stubbornly to the gravel lot. Boot prints pooled into uneven craters. Reflections of gray sky rippled across the shallow water, cold and metallic. Wind swept through the backfield of Ijanen Ravenbrook Military Academy, threading between climbing rigs and obstacle lanes still slick with mud. Cadets in sweat-soaked fatigues sprinted through shuttle drills, barking orders with the raw urgency only rookies knew. A whistle sliced through the noise. From near the rope tower, the supervising sergeant barked out times, shouting, "You're not racing each other. You're racing what kills you in real combat." At the far end, beneath the shadow of an old decommissioned observation tower, a lone woman stood watching. She was older than the cadets, mid to late 30s maybe. Her uniform was different. Contractor-grade fatigues, tan boots, a black undershirt, no insignia, no rank tag. Just a clipboard tucked under one arm, a pair of gloves looped through a carabiner, and a folded ball cap in her hand. She didn't pace, didn't write, didn't speak. She simply watched, and the cadets noticed. "Who's the civvy?" one muttered, trying and failing to hide a grin. "Probably some logistics paper pusher." "Saw her by the admin building earlier," another whispered. "Been standing there half an hour like she's waiting for a ride." 2 younger recruits jogged past on cooldown, slowing just enough to glance at her, careful not to make it obvious, but curious all the same. "She doesn't belong here," one murmured. Not quite quiet enough. The woman didn't react. Her gaze swept calmly across the yard, steady, detached, assessing. Another cadet jogged by, too close this time, his boot striking the ground right beside her foot. Muddy water splashed up her leg. Laughter followed. Still, nothing. She looked down briefly, brushed the splatter away with her glove, then returned her attention to the course. The whispers grew louder. "Lost, ma'am? You sure this isn't the PX?" someone called. "Careful, the mud's deeper than it looks. Wouldn't want you to twist an ankle." More chuckles came from near the monkey bars as heads began to turn. One of them, a stocky, blonde kid with a buzz cut and the kind of grin that probably saved him from a dozen high school fights, took a few steps toward her. "You with maintenance or something?" he asked, flashing his teeth. "If you're taking inventory, we might have misplaced a couple dumbbells near the range." She didn't answer. Not a word. He lingered for a beat, waiting for a reaction that never came, then gave a short laugh and turned back to his friends. "Guess not." Unbothered, she stepped away from the tower, walking down the dirt path between the rig lanes. Her stride was measured, quiet, too quiet for someone in combat boots. She passed 2 cadets loitering near the low crawl tunnel. One stuck out a boot, just barely. Her toe caught it. She stumbled forward, not badly, but enough to drop to one knee in the damp gravel. Dirt clung to the fabric instantly. Behind her came a snort. "Oops, didn't see you there." She rose without a word, brushed her pant leg with a gloved hand, leaving a darker streak across the beige cloth. Then she turned her head slightly, just enough for one piercing eye to meet his. For a heartbeat, he froze. Her expression wasn't angry, not even annoyed, but her gaze hit like a knife resting against skin, not cutting, just reminding him it could. Then she turned away and walked on toward the pull-up rigs. The whispers behind her softened, but the disrespect lingered like a storm cloud waiting to break. In the center of the lot, 4 cadets still laughed, still convinced she was just another soft civilian with mud on her boots. They mistook her silence for submission when it was really an open challenge. Training continued, cadets grunting through monkey bars slick with condensation, some slipping into the mud, others puffing their chests for attention. Whistles pierced the air, but on the far end of the yard, the supervising sergeant's focus had faded. He leaned lazily against a post, jotting in his notebook, leaving discipline to the group. That's when the 4 decided to move. They weren't the best or the brightest, but they had the swagger of boys who thought volume equaled power. The same stocky blonde pointed toward the woman near the rig lane. His friends followed, smirking. "She's still here? Must be waiting for her carpool." The wiry one chuckled. "Nah, she's standing there like she runs the place." He tilted his head toward the others. "Let's fix that." They started toward her, slow enough not to draw attention, fast enough to trap her. Thick mud clung to their boots as they spread out, boxing her in near the pull-up rigs. Up close, she looked smaller than they expected. Lean, compact, the kind of build they assumed would fold under pressure. "Afternoon, ma'am," the stocky one said, his tone dripping with fake politeness. "You lost? This isn't the admin office." She didn't respond, just shifted her stance slightly, one hand resting loosely at her hip, her gaze fixed ahead on the rig. "You hear me?" he pressed, stepping closer. "This is the warrior's yard, not a place for... What are you supposed to be? Logistics?" Another cadet snorted. "Doesn't matter. She doesn't belong here." Her silence wasn't nervous. It was deliberate, like a wall none of them could climb. That only fed their arrogance. The wiry one leaned in, sneering. "Careful, boys. She might write a report on us." Their laughter cracked through the air, sharp and ugly. Then the line was crossed. The stocky cadet shoved her, hard. Both hands hit her shoulder, forcing her straight into the dirt. She hit with a thud. Gravel tore into her palms, mud smeared across her cheek and sleeve. For a breath, the yard went quiet, holding the sound of her fall. Then came the laughter, loud, raw, unrestrained. "Damn, look at her! Right in the mud!" Should have brought a mop. Bet she's wishing she'd stayed by the admin building. Across the field, the supervising sergeant glanced up, his brow furrowed, then eased. He turned back to his notebook, deciding to let it play out. Cadet nonsense, he told himself. They'll work it out. The woman stayed still for a moment, one hand pressed against the dirt. Her fingers brushed something buried under the gravel, a mud-soaked piece of paper. She pulled it halfway free before it fell apart, just enough to catch the header. Advanced Close Quarters Combat. Instructor certification required. That's what she'd come to evaluate, to see if Ravenbrook Military Academy's training still met Central Command Division's odd standards, The cadets didn't know. The sergeant, pretending not to see, didn't know. But she did. And now, she'd seen enough. Slowly, she rose. No shouting, no threats. Just the calm swipe of mud from her sleeve, as if nothing about this surprised her. Her eyes met the 4 cadets. "You should be careful what you think you know," she said, voice even, quiet, but carrying more weight than a shout ever could. Her words weren't a threat, not even close to a challenge, but the calm edge in her tone unnerved them more than any shout ever could. Still, the cadets smirked, mistaking control for fear. "Did you hear that?" The wiry one laughed. "She's warning us. That's cute. She's lucky we're not allowed to rough up civilians." Their laughter came again, but this time it rang thinner, weaker around the edges. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't back away. Dirt smeared her sleeve, mud streaked her cheek, yet her gaze stayed locked, steady as stone. The cadets, blinded by arrogance, thought they'd won. What they didn't realize was that they'd just drawn the curtain on their own humiliation. The energy in the yard shifted. Cadets who should have been counting reps or timing drills began drifting closer, forming a half circle around the pull-up rigs. No orders were given, no whistle blown. It was instinct, the pull of tension thickening the air. The 4 who'd shoved her now stood at the center, still laughing, though louder this time, their voices straining to sound confident. "Come on, ma'am," one jeered, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve to mock her. "Show us a regulation push-up, or is it yoga day?" Snickers rippled through the growing crowd. Another piped up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bet she's never even held a rifle. Logistics doesn't count as combat." The wiry one smirked. "Maybe she can give us a class on crate stacking." The laughter sharpened, the kind that turned a moment of mockery into a show. But she didn't look at them. She didn't even glance at the crowd gathering around. Instead, her eyes flicked downward, reading their bodies like an open manual. The stocky one's weight tipped too far forward on his heels. The wiry one's fists clenched unevenly. The tall one's feet spread wide, broadcasting every move before he could even make it. She saw the flaws instantly, clear as cracks in glass. But to them, her silence meant fear. "She's scared," the tall one muttered loud enough for all to hear. "Can't even meet our eyes," the wiry one added. The stocky one grinned, stepping closer. "Don't worry. We'll take it easy on you. You can tap out when you've had enough." The crowd murmured, part amused, part uneasy. A few cadets shifted their boots, realizing the line being crossed, but no one stepped in. The sergeant at the far end kept his head down, still pretending not to see. Her breathing stayed calm, hands loose at her sides. Only her eyes shifted once, to the smudge of dirt still clinging to her sleeve. And in that stillness, something shifted. A memory flickered, another yard, not Ravenbrook's, but the wet, punishing sand of Coronado. Second week of Buddy S. The surf had been freezing, waves slamming into her ribs while instructors screamed until their throats went raw. She could still feel the sting of that mud pit, her classmates' voices snarling in her ear, daring her to quit, to ring the bell. The lesson from that day had burned itself deep into her memory. The loudest ones are always the weakest. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. The wiry cadet mistook that stillness for surrender. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he taunted, stepping close enough that the circle around them fell into silence, waiting for her to snap. She didn't. The quiet between them stretched until it became heavier than a shouted threat. And for a second, just a second, it shook him. He rocked back on his heels, forcing a laugh to mask the flicker of doubt. The others moved in tighter, their shadows stretching long across her boots in the fading sunlight. What started as a cheap shove was no longer a joke. It had turned into something volatile, something about to ignite. The air itself felt charged. Every cadet watching could sense it. The laughter gone, replaced by the sharp static of a fight waiting to happen. Through it all, she remained perfectly still. Mud streaked her sleeve, but her breathing was calm, her stance balanced, her eyes unreadable. The only warning she gave was the kind too quiet to recognize, the kind found in silence. The tall cadet broke first. Annoyed that she hadn't flinched, hadn't played along, he stepped in and grabbed her sleeve, a fistful of fabric at the elbow, the way you'd pull a teammate back into line. But that touch changed everything. It wasn't a taunt anymore. It was contact, force. And before he could draw another breath, the dynamic flipped. She moved, not quickly in panic, but instinctively, like training had rewired her bones. Her left arm dropped, her right foot pivoted, her body turning in one smooth motion. And suddenly, the tall cadet's wrist was trapped, twisted, and driven into the dirt under his own weight. He hit hard, the air leaving his chest in a grunt, one knee sinking deep into the mud, while the other leg sprawled helplessly behind him. Her grip held steady, controlled, efficient, surgical. No wasted effort, no anger, just perfect precision. A stunned beat passed before the sound of boots scraping back broke the tension. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. She released him just as smoothly as she'd taken him down. He stayed kneeling, wide-eyed, breath coming in short bursts. She took a single step back, hands lowered but firm, posture calm as if she'd only adjusted her balance. When she finally spoke, her voice was even, almost gentle. "Walk away," she said, "before you embarrass yourselves any further." The cadet scrambled up, cheeks flushed deeper than his uniform. His eyes burned, not from pain, but humiliation. Rage. The kind that comes from being outmatched by someone who hadn't even broken a sweat. The stocky one glanced between his fallen friend and the woman, fists curling tight. "No," he muttered, stepping forward. "You don't get to do that and just walk away." She didn't budge. The wiry one spoke up next, voice shaking slightly. "Think you're tough? You're not skilled. You're just fast. That was luck." His tone tried for confidence, but cracked near the end. Still, they moved in, all three of them, pride wounded and tempers hot, as the circle of cadets around them thickened. Even those who'd hesitated before leaned in now, drawn by the pull of spectacle, disguised as a test. Concern flickered on a few faces, but no one stepped forward. That's how it always went. No one interfered once a lesson was about to be learned the hard way. The woman didn't raise her fists, didn't shift her footing, didn't even blink. But something in her eyes changed. Not aggression. Focus. Readiness. She glanced once at the ground where they'd shoved her, at the dirt still clinging to her sleeve, and it no longer looked like humiliation to her. It was a boundary, a line in the mud. Cross it and see what happens. They didn't notice. They stepped forward, and that's when it began. The stocky cadet moved first, the same one who'd shoved her earlier. He came in low, trying to tackle her around the waist like it was some backyard fight. His boots pounded through the soft dirt, arms wide, head down. Too much bravado, not nearly enough skill. She waited until the last possible heartbeat. Then, with the same terrifying precision she'd shown before, she pivoted. His weight surged forward into empty air. She caught his shoulder, redirected his motion, and guided him straight into the ground. It wasn't a throw. It was a correction. He hit face first with a heavy, wet slap, arms sprawled like a stunned animal. Gasps broke through the circle. No one laughed this time. The wiry cadet was next, quicker and meaner, his fist already cocked. He swung for her head, wild and full of anger. She slipped under it effortlessly. Her elbow came up fast and hard, driving straight into his ribs. The sound was short, brutal, a sharp grunt of air leaving his lungs. He doubled over, hands clutching his side, choking for breath. She didn't need another strike. She just gave a simple push. He toppled beside his friend, coughing, eyes wide in disbelief. A few cadets on the edge of the circle backed up toward the equipment shed. A gray-haired staff sergeant watched from a distance, hand twitching toward his whistle before freezing mid-air. He looked at the supervising sergeant still scribbling in his notebook, then slowly lowered his hand and walked off toward the barracks. Later, that choice would matter. It'd be in the report. But right now, it just meant Avery Rogers stood alone. The third cadet, a broad-shouldered, square-jawed kid built more for show than control, hesitated, then lunged in from behind, arms out wide for a bear hug. She didn't resist, or at least, that's how it looked. She dropped low just as his arms closed around her, knees bent, spine compressed, and then she exploded upward, hips slamming into his center of gravity. He was airborne before he even realized what had happened. He hit the ground hard, flat on his back with a thud that sent a cloud of dust swirling into the air. A low groan slipped out as he blinked up at the gray sky, dazed, one hand stretching toward it like he could grab his balance back. That left only one standing, the tall cadet she'd wrist-locked earlier. He didn't charge right away this time. He looked around instead, chest heaving, eyes darting between his three teammates writhing in the dirt. "What the hell?" he muttered, voice trembling. "How'd she—" Then he met her eyes. No anger there, no triumph, just patience. Waiting. That calmness cracked something inside him. With a frustrated yell, he bolted forward. This time, she didn't step aside. She met him head-on. His arm came up for a wild swing, but her hand shot forward first, grabbing his forearm, twisting it inward with flawless timing. His own momentum betrayed him, folding him into her movement like a trap closing shut. In an instant, he was bent at the waist, shoulder locked, his wrist cranked high between his shoulder blades. "Stop!" he barked through clenched teeth. She held him there, steady as iron. Every eye in the yard was fixed on her now. Even the instructors who'd pretended not to see stood frozen. Mud smeared across her sleeves, a thin line of blood trailing from a scrape on her knuckle. Her breathing was steady, measured. The control in her movements spoke louder than any strike ever could. She hadn't punched a face. She hadn't drawn blood. She'd just dismantled them. Clean, efficient, disciplined. Then she let go. The tall cadet stumbled forward, collapsing to his knees, panting like he'd run a mile uphill. Avery Rogers looked around the circle. No one dared move. No one dared speak. When she finally broke the silence, her voice came soft but firm. "Enough." This time, no one laughed. The quiet that followed was heavy, not confusion, but realization. The kind that hits when you understand the rules were never what you thought. From the back, a prior service Marine, Someone who'd seen real operators work, put it together first. The precision, the economy of movement, the way she'd neutralized every one of them without chaos or wasted force. He'd seen that before at Pendleton, from instructors who didn't need to shout because their presence did it for them. "Oh, hell," he whispered. "She's not a contractor. She's—" But he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because by then, everyone knew they were staring at something far beyond their comprehension. The laughter was gone. What filled the air now wasn't mockery. It was awe. She didn't speak another word. Instead, she simply adjusted the wrist of her glove and stood her ground. The shift in power was unmistakable now. They were the ones uncertain, and the woman standing in the center of the mud-streaked training yard hadn't come here to prove anything, but somehow she had anyway. The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. The 4 cadets who'd mocked her were still down in the dirt, faces streaked with mud, lungs heaving, stunned into wordless disbelief. Then a sharp voice split through the quiet. "What the hell is going on here?" The crowd turned as Lieutenant Colonel Mason Drake strode in, broad-shouldered, presence commanding, the kind of officer whose voice carried authority beyond his rank. 2 junior staff followed close behind as his eyes swept across the scene. One glance told him enough to know something had gone wrong. 4 filthy cadets. A silent half-circle of onlookers and a woman standing alone at the center, unflinching. "Who started this?" he barked. All 4 pointed at once. "She attacked us. We were just talking. She overreacted. We didn't even touch her." The excuses tumbled over each other, desperate and clumsy. Drake's brow furrowed as he turned his gaze toward the woman. She didn't defend herself, didn't flinch. Just stood there, mud on her sleeves, one palm scraped raw, face calm, unreadable. Something about her posture caught his attention. It wasn't defiance, but certainty. Back straight, chin level, boots set perfectly at shoulder width. She didn't look like she was standing in the yard. She looked like she owned it. "Who are you?" Drake asked slowly. Without a word, she reached inside her jacket and pulled out a laminated contractor pass. Handing it to him, he glanced at it. "Assigned logistics consultant," he read aloud, then murmured to himself. "Referred by Central Command Division." His voice trailed off. As she raised a hand to wipe a smear of mud from her cheek, his eyes caught on something just beneath her sleeve. A small tattoo, faded but clear. A gold trident, the unmistakable mark of a Navy SEAL. His expression changed instantly. He looked at her again, this time really seeing her. The control in her stance, the quiet authority in the way she hadn't needed to shout or strike to take command. "Wait," he said, his voice lower now, almost cautious. "What's your name?" Her reply was calm, measured. "Lieutenant Commander Avery Rogers." The name dropped like a weight between them. A collective breath seemed to catch in the air, and a few cadets at the back audibly gasped. One of the instructors in the back straightened immediately, recognition flashing across his face. Lieutenant Colonel Mason Drake. Blinked once, recalibrating everything he thought he understood about what he'd just witnessed. "I've read your file," he said quietly. "You're—" He started, but she gave a small nod before he could finish. He didn't need to. When Drake turned toward the cadets, his expression hardened to steel. "You 4 just assaulted a Navy SEAL combat veteran, someone who's seen more real war zones than all of you combined have seen classrooms. What do you have to say for yourselves? The four looked down, shame washing over their faces. One shook his head, his voice barely audible. She didn't even fight back at first. Another muttered, "She didn't have to." Drake shifted his gaze back to Chekityon Hatuk's Avery Rogers. "You could have broken bones," he said. "Didn't need to," she replied evenly. He held her stare for a long moment before nodding once, deep and deliberate. It wasn't just respect. It was recognition. "Thank you, Commander," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but the message didn't need words. In that instant, everyone in that drill yard understood exactly who she was and who she wasn't. She wasn't a civilian. She wasn't a consultant. She was a Navy SEAL, and they had shoved her into the dirt. Drake didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. When he faced the yard again, his tone was calm, but each word struck like a hammer. "This woman isn't logistics," he said, scanning the faces frozen before him. "She's Lieutenant Commander Avery Rogers, retired Navy SEAL. 2 bronze stars, 1 silver star, dozens of classified deployments. She's bled for this flag longer than most of you have even worn one." The words moved through the ranks like a shockwave. Cadets turned to each other in stunned silence, whispers rippling in disbelief. Avery stood motionless, hands folded at her waist, face unreadable. The sound of her own name didn't stir her. She'd been through worse, far worse. But for the 4 cadets who had mocked, shoved, and tried to humiliate her, the weight of realization crushed harder than any punishment could. The stocky one, still half crouched in the mud where she'd dropped him earlier, lifted his eyes and whispered, "Ma'am, I didn't know." Drake's response came sharp and cold. "You didn't know," he repeated, "because you assumed. You saw someone quiet, someone older, someone without a combat tab or a weapon, and instead of showing discipline, you decided to show off." Lieutenant Colonel Mason Drake's voice was calm but sharp enough to cut through the air. No one dared answer. The wiry cadet swallowed hard, searching for words. "We thought she was just a contractor," he muttered. Drake turned on him, eyes cold. "You think a uniform decides a person's worth? You think a patch makes you untouchable? She's seen more in a single year than you'll see in a decade, and she didn't even have to raise a weapon to teach you that lesson." He faced Avery Rogers Harton again. "Commander Rogers, do you wish to press charges?" She met his gaze steadily. "No." He hesitated. "No?" She shook her head. "They've already learned more from this than punishment ever could." Her tone was calm, neither forgiving nor vengeful, just final. She didn't need to say anything else. The shame didn't belong to her anymore. Drake gave a small nod, understanding her completely. Then he turned back to the cadets. "You 4 will report to your commanding officers for immediate disciplinary review. You'll scrub this entire yard until it shines, and tomorrow morning you'll stand before the honor board and explain, word for word, what happened here." They nodded quickly, faces red with humiliation. Avery didn't look at them. She didn't have to. Around them, the rest of the cadets began to drift away, whispering among themselves, the weight of what they'd witnessed sinking deep. Some avoided her eyes, too ashamed to look. Others met her gaze with quiet respect, not the kind earned through shouting or muscle, but through composure, precision, and strength restrained by purpose. She adjusted her sleeve, covering the faint trident tattoo once again, and brushed the remaining mud from her fatigues in calm, measured strokes. Drake watched her for a moment longer, then said softly, "We're lucky to have you here. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because in that moment, everyone understood. It wasn't about who she was. It was a reminder of what kind of silence you never underestimate. The yard slowly emptied. Most cadets were sent to clean gear or face their instructors, leaving only her. Lieutenant Commander Avery Rogers crouched down at the center of the drill lane, not out of exhaustion, not in defeat, but simply to clean. From her pouch, she took a small cloth and began wiping the mud from her boots, one deliberate stroke at a time. No rush, no anger. Just that same steady focus that had carried her through missions most of these recruits would never even hear about. Lieutenant Colonel Mason Drake lingered nearby. He hadn't left either. He took a few steps closer, stopping just behind her. When he spoke, his voice had softened, touched with respect. They'll never forget this lesson. Without looking up, Avery Rogers answered, "Neither will I." Her tone held no pride, no resentment, just quiet truth. She rose to her feet and tapped her boots against the gravel, knocking the last bits of dirt loose. Her uniform was still damp, her gloves still scuffed. But there was nothing unsteady or uncertain in her bearing. No one would ever mistake her again. Her eyes drifted once more to the open field, the same patch of ground where she'd been shoved, mocked, and dismissed. Now, that dirt didn't symbolize humiliation. It marked their fall, not hers. With calm precision, she adjusted her sleeves, tucked her gloves neatly beneath her belt, and walked off the training yard without a glance behind her. Not a single cadet dared lift their head, because in just 10 minutes, they hadn't merely witnessed a fight. They'd seen something far more enduring. They'd seen what quiet power truly looks like. What would you have done in her place? Do you think those cadets truly learned their lesson? Tell us in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that real respect is earned in silence, not shouted across a field, hit that like button, subscribe to Old Bill's Tales, and tap the bell icon so you never miss what happens when the odds flip. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that rank isn't everything. Your next mission's already waiting on the screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time. Brand new.